The first thing Nora noticed wasn't the garlic. It was the silence. Kepler 9 never did silence. The station hummed like a living lung, vents breathing, translator drones buzzing, distant footsteps, and 100 alien voices threading the halls into one endless chorus. But the second Nora's portable pan warmed and olive oil began to shimmer, the corridor outside her quarters went quiet, like the station itself leaned in. She'd learned that quiet meant one of two things. Something was broken, or something was about to be. Nora Vance wasn't a diplomat. She wasn't an officer. She wasn't anybody on the roster of important people. She was maintenance. The kind of human you only remember exists when the lights flicker, the heat drops, or a water line screams in protest. 3 years on Kepler 9 and she'd crawled through more vents than most species had even seen. Tonight had been brutal. 12 hours inside a shaft barely wider than her shoulders, scraping oxidation damage off conduits while the station's armored engineers watched from the outside, too bulky to fit. Her jumpsuit smelled like coolant and metal. Her hands ached. Her hair had come loose and been shoved back into a messy ponytail out of pure stubbornness. And her stomach. Her stomach was done negotiating. She shut her quarters door, locked it, and pulled out her contraband like it was treasure. Real garlic. Real butter. Fresh basil from the hydroponics bay. Earth seeds she'd planted quietly, like a secret prayer. And pasta dough she'd hand-rolled last weekend because the dispenser could replicate nutrients, sure. But it couldn't replicate home. The oil shimmered. Nora dropped garlic in. It hit the pan with a sizzle so satisfying it almost felt like revenge. The smell rose fast, sharp, warm, unmistakably human, filling her cramped kitchenette and turning her tiny quarters into something that didn't feel like a box in space. For one breath, it felt like a kitchen back on Earth. For one breath, Nora smiled. Then, tap, tap, soft, careful. Not the heavy knock of station security. Not the polite chime of a diplomat. It was small. Nora froze with her spoon halfway to the pan. Tap, tap. She frowned. Nope. Because nobody came to a maintenance tech's quarters at this hour unless it was either a crisis, or it was weird enough to become one. Nora wiped her hands on her coveralls and edged to the door panel. Yeah, she called. Who's there? No words. Just breathing. And then another sound. A tiny, impatient huff, like someone offended that a door had the audacity to exist. Nora opened the door. And her brain stalled. 5 Earth cubs stood in her doorway. Small, fluffy, golden and gray-striped, with oversized paws and round faces that should have belonged on posters and plush toys, not on a galactic station's diplomatic deck. But what made Nora blink twice wasn't just that they were there. It was that each one of them was holding a bowl. Not station-issued. Not clean. Some were mismatched metal containers like they'd been stolen out of a cafeteria line. One had a little dent like it had been dropped during a daring escape. Another looked suspiciously like a cup repurposed into bowl through sheer willpower. And all 5 cubs stared at Nora like they had formally scheduled this meeting. The front cub, a tiny gray-striped one, took a single step forward, raised its bowl higher. And Saturday. The others sat too. Perfectly in sync. Like a squad. Like this was a ritual. Nora stared at them. The cubs stared back. Steam drifted from her pan behind her. Garlic and basil curled into the air like a signal flare. Nora swallowed. How did you find me? The cubs didn't answer. They didn't need to. One of them sniffed the air and let out a tiny rumble that sounded suspiciously like, oh. That's why. Nora's eyes flicked down to the bowls again. You guys came prepared. The cub's ears twitched like that was correct. Nora looked down the corridor. No handlers. No alarms. No security drones screaming. BIOARK containment breach. Just 5 little disasters standing politely at her door like they'd been raised by librarians. Nora exhaled slowly. Okay. First question, how are you even out? The cubs blinked. Second question, why do you have bowls? The cubs blinked harder, like that one was obvious. Nora's stomach chose that moment to growl, loud enough that the nearest cub's eyes widened in what could only be described as competitive hunger. Nora glanced back at her pan. There was enough pasta for one human. Not enough for 5 cubs. Her sensible brain tried to stand up and announce it was in charge. But then the smallest cub, barely bigger than a loaf of bread, lifted its bowl with both paws and gave Nora a look that felt like, please. Not desperate. Not demanding. Just brave. Nora's throat tightened in an annoyingly human way. She groaned. I don't even know if you're allowed to eat garlic. One cub tilted its head, as if to say, we're allowed to eat destiny. Nora pinched the bridge of her nose. You're going to ruin my life. The cubs didn't move. They just sat there, 5 tiny predators pretending they weren't predators at all. Nora stepped aside. Fine. Come in. Sit. They flowed into her quarters like they owned it. Not chaotic. Not wild. Just purposeful. They lined up by her small table, bowls forward, ears perked, eyes locked on her pan like it was sacred. Nora grabbed her tablet and pulled up the BioArc dietary chart with shaking seriousness. Tomatoes. Safe. Basil. Safe. Olive oil. Safe. Garlic. Intense but non-toxic in small amounts. Nora stared at the small amounts line. Then stared at the 5 bowls. We'll make it work. She portioned out what she had, turning one generous human serving into 6 modest ones. She added butter anyway, because butter made everything feel like forgiveness. Then she sprinkled the last of her parmesan like she was blessing a holy offering. The cubs watched with reverence. Nora set the first bowl down. Instantly, 5 little faces leaned in. But they didn't devour it. They waited. As if waiting for permission. Nora blinked again. Okay, that's unsettling. She pointed at the nearest cub. Blow on it. It's hot. The cub stared. Then, very seriously, puffed a tiny breath into the bowl. The others copied it like it was a diplomatic ritual. Nora's mouth twitched. Great. Now you're civilized. The first cub took a bite. Its eyes widened. And for half a second, Nora watched something incredible happen. A creature born with instincts older than civilization tasted comfort and forgot it was supposed to be fierce. The cub chewed slowly. Like the bite mattered. Then it made a sound. Not a roar. Not a growl. A tiny, broken little noise that was somehow pure gratitude. The others dove in right after, and Nora's quarters filled with soft munching, little chuffs, the occasional satisfied rumble that vibrated through the table. Nora ate her own portion last, half smiling while her stomach complained about the delay. She watched them like she couldn't help it. 5 cubs. On a space station. Eating garlic basil pasta like it was the only safe thing in the universe. One of them kept hugging its bowl between bites like someone might steal the memory out of it. Nora swallowed hard. Because she suddenly understood what this wasn't. It wasn't cubs want food. It was, cubs want home. These were ARC cubs, born in sterile nursery modules, raised by handlers in quiet shifts, surrounded by metal walls and recycled air. No wild wind. No real sun. No earth smell. And here, in Nora's cramped little quarters, something finally smelled like a place that loved you back. A tiny paw nudged its empty bowl forward. Nora blinked. Already. Another paw nudged another bowl. Nora stared at the bowls like they'd betrayed her personally. You're kidding. The cubs looked very serious. Nora laughed. Quiet, warm, tired. You are absolutely going to get me arrested. The cubs didn't deny it. They just sat there, eyes bright, waiting. Nora sighed and opened her pantry container. Empty. She had enough ingredients for maybe one more small batch. And that was it. She looked at the cubs again. They stared back. Nora's heart did the stupid thing where it chose compassion over logic. "Fine," she muttered. "Tomorrow." The cub's ears perked like that word was magic. Nora pointed a spoon at them. "Tomorrow. And you're not telling anyone you were here." The cubs blinked. Which was not a promise. But it was all she was going to get. They slipped out as quietly as they'd arrived, bowls tucked against their chests like treasures. Nora locked her door. Then leaned back against it, staring at her empty pan. What just happened? Her comm pinged. Then again. Then again. Nora frowned and opened the station feed. A blurry corridor clip was already circulating. 5 small Earth cubs. Bowls in paws. Marching in a perfect line down the diplomatic deck like they owned the place. Caption. Whose babies are these? Why do they have bowls? Why are they headed to maintenance? Nora's soul left her body. Then her comm pinged again. A message. Private. From a handler. Short. Simple. Terrified. If you have them, please keep them calm. They haven't eaten properly since the transfer. Nora stared at the text. Then stared at her empty pantry. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not smug. Not triumphant. Just human. Because she understood something profound in the dumbest way possible. Sometimes a station didn't need stronger weapons. Sometimes it didn't need better politics. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to feed the scared little things. Nora opened a new request form. Supply requisition. Earth ingredients. Garlic. Butter. Basil. Tomatoes. Flour. Cheese. The expensive ones. She stared at the cost line. Then approved it anyway. Worth it, she whispered. Because tomorrow, she wouldn't be cooking for one. Tomorrow, she'd be cooking for 5 tiny predators with bowls. And a universe that had forgotten what home smelled like. If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more HFY moments. This is HFY Survival Arena, and the next one is even crazier.